On September 11th, 2001, I was in Tokyo. I was actually working for Merrill Lynch Japan 1 year before I had resigned from the US Embassy, from the State Department, to work in the private sector. That evening, I was watching a news station, Asahi Hoso, and the news broke to this accident that happened at the World Trade Center. It was after the first plane had crashed, but things were still very uncertain. There was a lot not known. So I kept watching, and then the second plane crashed into the World Trade Center. And then later we heard about the Pentagon, and then much later about the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. So I pretty much stayed up the whole night watching the news and feeling that I wish I could have been in New York, because as a New Yorker, it really struck home.
I was working for a television station in Tampa, Florida, and actually President George W. Bush was at a school in our viewing area that morning. At my office, Good Morning America was playing on the TV on my desk, and I remember watching in horror as we saw those images come through, the first plane into the first tower, and not long after, the second plane into the second tower. I think as everyone around the world who saw those in real time knew, America was under attack.
I was a junior in high school at the time. My high school was in downtown Brooklyn, only about 3 miles from the World Trade Center. And of course, the attacks happened early in the morning, so I had just arrived at school. Class was about to begin. And of course, in that days, nobody had smartphones. In my school, there was no TV. There were just a couple computers. So I didn't hear the news in real time. I learned about it from one of my friends who was logging into the computer in between class. And he told us that a plane had just hit the World Trade Center. And that was it. No more details, no videos. So most of us thought it was an accident. I imagined a small plane hitting one of the towers by accident. I didn't think it was a terrorist attack. Then about a half hour later, we heard that the second plane had hit. And it was only at that time that we all realized, this was no accident. This was a terrorist attack.
I mean, it really hurt to see what had happened. I knew the World Trade Center quite well. I'd been to the Windows on the World restaurant on the top floor of the North Tower. I'd been to the observation deck. So this was a very familiar place for me. So to see what happened really had a profound impact on me. So much so that 1 year later, I had resigned from my job at Merrill Lynch, and I came back into the State Department. And part of the motivation for returning to public service was what had happened on September 11th, 2001. I realized that being a public servant and to serve my country was what I really wanted to do in life. So I came back.
Being in the news media in the days and the weeks after the attacks, I was forced to relive those images over and over and over again. And of course, I was reading all of the news. After a while, I began to feel that I wasn't doing enough, that I was putting out bad news, but I wanted to help. I wanted to do something different with my life. And I decided to dedicate myself to promoting peace through mutual understanding across cultures and languages. And that's wonderfully what I have the opportunity to do as a diplomat.
The September 11th attacks were 20 years ago. And I know many New Yorkers, people who were born in New York and people who live in New York, who have not experienced September 11th because they're too young or they were not living there at the time. So I think it's important that as time goes on, we continue to tell the stories and listen to the stories of people who experienced that day. so that we never forget.
Personally, I have two children who were born after 9/11, and I think it's important that their generation learn about what happened that day and also about what the United States and other countries around the world are trying to do to promote human rights and freedoms so that this will never happen again, that we understand each other better, and that people around the world are afforded rights, and that we have effective diplomacy and multinational cooperation.
I think we should also keep in mind that accidents or natural disasters or terrorist attacks can happen in any country at any time. So it's important to remember to be compassionate to others and to be prepared to help and assist. If something happens in the United States, if something happens in Japan, if something happens in another country, I think it's important that we all unite and lend a helping hand, because oftentimes that's the only way that we can get through it.
Earlier that year, there was a kind of an Olympics for policemen and firemen from all over the world. It took place in the United States, and there was a group of firefighters that participated in this Olympic type event from Japan. These firefighters, led by Captain Hama from Tokyo, decided on their own to come to New York to help their brother firefighters. And they did this against the orders of their superiors. They brought their own equipment. They took their own annual leave. They paid for their own plane tickets. By the end of the week, they were there on ground zero. So after September 11, 2001, Japan, of course, experienced its own great disaster in 2011 when the Tohoku earthquake, tsunami, nuclear meltdown happened. Again, I was in Tokyo. I was actually I was in Yokohama studying Japanese, but certain embassy staff and family members had the opportunity to return to the States, and but I insisted on staying. I felt an obligation to remain. Many people volunteered, many Americans I know volunteered, came back to Japan, especially those who taught English in Japan. Those who taught in the towns in Tohoku that were affected felt that they had to help. So they raised money, they came in person to help with the recovery. And of course, the Operation Tomodachi was an unprecedented activity that really bonded the two countries. And so you see in the span of 10 years how it grew. And when you ask the service members, the US service members who participated in Operation Tomodachi, they said, of course, we're here to help. You know, we live in Japan, we're your neighbors. So it's that kind of feeling that I think is now very common between Americans and Japanese, that they will come to each other's side to help when their friends are in trouble.